Welcome to the Likeville podcast. This is John Faithful Hamer. Today we're going to be talking with artist Bevan Ramsay about how to make it as an artist in the 21st century, what art is, what art isn't, and all sorts of other fun things. But before we get to that, a couple of things, some sort of housekeeping issues. We would very much like to get your support. The podcast costs quite a bit of money to make, produce, and maintain. So there's a number of ways you can support us. The most straightforward way you can support us is becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do that at www.patreon.com/Likeville podcast. Also, to keep up with what's going on with the podcast, with upcoming guests, if you want to tell us questions you'd like us to ask future guests, there's two ways to keep up to date with what's going on. One of them is to join our Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, it's just called Likeville. So if you type that into the search bar, you should find it. You can also, on Twitter, our Twitter handle is @the_Likeville_pod. We had to shorten that because of the character limits. So we put out a lot of new information about what's going on with the podcast in those two areas. As you know, our main streaming location at the moment is on iTunes. However, if you aren't a big fan of Apple, some of you have a big hate on for Apple, you can listen to the podcast on overcast.fm. You can just go to overcast.fm and type in Likeville, and it'll all pop up. So along with our Patreon supporters, this episode is brought to you by our three sponsors. Elsa's Bar in Plateau, Montreal, in Montreal. Fantastic place. If you're already from Montreal, I'm sure you know what a fantastic place Elsa is on Roy Street. If you are planning on visiting Montreal, definitely check this place out. This is where the locals go. I mean, it's a little bit off one of the main drags, Boulevard de Saint-Laurent. But it's the kind of place that where people from the Plateau actually go. It's a fantastic place, really nice ambiance, fantastic food, great place. This episode's also brought to you by Good Mix, which is a delicious paleo mix of seeds and nuts and dried berries. It's absolutely delicious. You have it with yogurt in the morning, and it fills you for hours and hours and hours. It's unbelievable. It's like you don't even get hungry at all for 5 or 6 hours after you have this stuff. And it does phenomenal things for your digestion. It's really, really good. This episode is also brought to you by Seb Furtado Photography. Sebastian is a fine art photographer, does all sorts of different kinds of photography, but he also gives lessons and tutorials where he will take people on a weekend where they learn how to photograph the stars or where they learn how to do nature photography. And so he will show you completely how to use the camera, all the mechanics of how to do it. He'll teach you about light, about all these things. He'll also show you how to edit your photographs after to get them to be, their absolute best. So, and he's a fantastic teacher. If you go online, you can find all sorts of testimonials attesting to that fact. And Sebastian also offers online courses. You can check those out at www.sebfurtado.com/store for more information. Without further ado, I give you Bevan Ramsay. Welcome to the Likeville podcast. This is John Faithful Hamer. Today we're going to be talking with artist Bevan Ramsay. Good morning, Bevan.
Good morning.
It's great to talk to you. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I have so many questions that I want to ask you about sort of how you can sort of survive and make it as an artist in the 21st century, and a lot of questions pertaining to that. But first of all, can you just sort of tell our listeners what kind, because you work with a lot of different mediums. I mean, I've seen you do everything from cabinets to paintings to sculptures to really huge shit to organizing garbage in India. like everything. So, sort of, how would you describe what your art is?
Ooh, boy. Well, I've always said that I have a project-based practice. So I will, work on, put together a project that I want to do, and it usually this sort of, well, I don't know. Sometimes the materials come first. Sometimes the idea comes first. But as it goes, they sort of start to inform each other, the materials, the idea, and vice versa. And it evolves. And then eventually I make a bunch of work that is that project. And then when I finish, I move on to something completely different. So a whole new project presents itself and I get working on that. Now, yeah, it's funny though, because I happen to be just this past year completely changing the way I work. So that I don't think is the case anymore, this project-based practice, where now I have the stuff I'm working on now is a really just this sort of ongoing personal internal dialogue, I think, through materials, which is the way I think a lot of artists tend to work. So they have, kind of one body of work that is continuously evolving over their careers. And I didn't think I would ever be working that way, but I seem to be now. So
yeah, it seems to me that most artists in history were working that way, but then in the 20th century, it got really sort of, I don't know, more kind of idea based and sort of overthinking it and very sort of cerebral. I don't know. It's, but it seems to me when I look at art from all over history, different cultures, they seem to be very much focused on the materials.
Yeah, I think so. Or yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's such a broad. I don't know. Throughout history, art throughout history is such a broad thing. It's hard to have any larger sweeping statements about it that hold across very much of it. Yeah, I don't know.
How do you think plastics are changed? Because I mean, it used to be, right, let's say you were some sort of Inuit soapstone carver, you would like look, they say, okay, I would look at the rock and I would see, what is this rock? And I see a seal in the rock, so I'm going to carve a fucking seal, right? Or I look at a piece of wood and I see the Apostle John, so I'm going to carve the Apostle John out of this. But now with plastics, you can make whatever the fuck you want. I mean, like...
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and you can cast stuff, and then I don't know, like I've done some of that, that soft tissue stuff is able to, construct figures out of cast parts, and yeah, I don't know. It's a crazy. It's funny. It's a crazy. It's a crazy time to be making art now, and that after Duchamp in the 20th century, it's bizarre. It's like It reminds me of that. It reminds me of the omnivore's dilemma, where anything you can make anything you can think of.
Which sounds cool, but it's also like being in Ben and Jerry's when you've got like fucking 50 flavors. It must be overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. And anything you make, you can call art legitimately.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The choice is crippling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like one of the things, I'm going to put links to a bunch of your work when we put the podcast up, but definitely the soft tissue, but also like Jersey Girls. I mean, where did you get the idea for that?
Oh,
can you just describe, tell the listeners what this was?
So it was, I made this installation where I made life-size dinosaur skeletons, but modeled after like the clipped together cut out plywood dinosaur toys. and then I finished, lacquered them and finished them really smooth and sexy, and put there's a triceratops that was finished in rose chintz pattern on an ivory background, on an ivory base, and then it was being attacked by 3 velociraptors that were in different pastel colors and then painted over with gold rococo sort of scroll work. Anyway, yeah, it just that I heard a story about this auction house in Europe that was auctioning off like full, complete dinosaur skeletons to just as like fucking baubles for rich people to put.
Yeah,
in,
they're sold in auctions all over the world, and it's a big industry. Like if you find like in Alberta, I was talking to this guy who for a while worked for somebody who looked for them. If you find like an intact, let's say, T-Rex in Alberta, and there's tons of them all over the in Alberta especially, but if you find one of those, you can sell it for easily $2 or $3 million. And if you find some of the more rare ones, it can be like $10 million, and they get sold on yeah, exactly. But it's not just that one you're talking about. It's apparently all over the world.
Yeah, I wonder, is this a new thing? I mean, I heard of that one and it just was new to me, and it kind of thought it was fucking fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
If you're rich enough, you can buy a piece of our like planetary heritage and just and keep it as yours
in your house,
in your living room.
Well, apparently, I just
hang your jacket on it.
I read it was I think like a month ago. I read that new book it's the rise and fall of the dinosaurs. I'm blanking on the dude's name. I follow him on Twitter now, but he's like this really hotshot paleontologist. He's a young guy. He's like personally discovered a whole bunch of new dinosaurs and named them. And anyway, so it's very interesting because not only does he give this fascinating sort of narrative of the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, he also talks about the rise of paleontology from the late 19th century to present, and it's always been kind of a rich man's game. And this industry this industry in like
archaeology,
buying even more so, way more so, but and they've been buying these giant dinosaur skeletons. Usually they buy them and then they give it to a museum and they name a building after them or something, or they say, but sometimes they actually, and he talks about, he has like pictures in his book and he describes where he goes to some dude's fucking house and he's got like in this big mansion with vaulted ceilings, he's got a dinosaur. Like, is that not the most badass thing ever? Like,
it's pretty insane.
Yeah.
This whole thing about the rich man's game and dinosaurs makes me think of something else, which is fucking bizarre. The Natural History Museum in New York City has the fourth floor is where they have their whole dinosaur collection, but it goes and then it extends right up, not quite to present, but certainly to Beringian land bridge period, large North American mammals that are now all wiped out. But so it starts from dinosaurs and goes all the way. It's all stuff that's extinct, but they have all these incredible specimens. But what's insane to me is that the whole thing, it appears, is paid for by the Koch brothers. Which then with like, I don't know, they're necessarily in bed with like, right-wing politics and ultimately the Christian right. It have to be because it's all the same fucking community.
Exactly. The Koch brothers are weird. They're libertarians, so they're like super pro-abortion, and they're not they're pro-abortion. They're not like Christian right types at all. They're into, they want guns. They want the right to bear arms, but they're also super pro weed, and like they're against they're super against the war on drugs. They're sort of like your typical kind of, in many ways, kind of like Silicon Valley tech libertarians. They just like, they're paranoid of the government, and they just don't want like a lot of taxes, and they don't want a lot of control, and They sort of say, like, look at the 20th century. Did corporations kill like hundreds of millions of people? No. Negatory. That would have been governments. So
although I don't know if you factor pollution in on that and from industrial activity.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I'm not like I'm clearly not a pro corporate dude, but the Koch brothers they're like I heard that too, but then I looked into them because I saw this like documentary on Netflix, which was all like they suck. And so I looked into it more, and I realized the documentary was like about 80% bullshit. And like, what? Yeah, but no, I mean, it is like a rich. I mean, you would not have those beautiful displays you're talking about if it were not for these massive donors. Like, and you wouldn't have the amazing. I mean, Martha Nussbaum makes this point in her book on. Why not for profit? Why democracy needs the humanities? She says basically you wouldn't have the amazing American university system if it weren't for this network of super generous private donors, right?
Yeah.
And that's a weird American thing, because like, if you look in Europe or in most places, but Europe is a perfect example. If people make like tons of money, they basically just build a castle and sit on that shit like a dragon forever, you know? Whereas the United States, they've got this huge tradition of people like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and all, where they make like a shit ton of money and then they give it all away. Like Bill Gates is doing the same thing. They just give it all away. Yeah. It's this weird American tradition.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And everything amazing in New York City pretty much is just like, a gift of rich people at some point.
Yeah. And this is actually this is one of the main questions that I wanted to ask you, because of course the art scene is exactly this too, right? I mean,
God, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But so how do you, and I don't know how to put this delicately, so I'm just going to put it straight. I mean, how do you sell art to rich people?
There's a $1 million question.
or to put it in even more indelicately, and this is like a basic kind of, I don't know, sociological, epistemological question that I've been asking myself a lot lately, is how do you sort of sell something to somebody who doesn't know what you're talking about? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you basically,
well, I think you don't. Really, I mean, I think people buying art are buying it because they like it. I mean, they do understand it, right? Like, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but I don't think anybody's spending a lot of money buying art because somebody told them they should. Because I suppose there are cases where people do that, where there's like art. If you're stupid wealthy and you want to diversify your portfolio or whatever, you can hire a consultant that will and you give them a budget or whatever. You say, I want to take this much money out of the market and turn it into art that I hope will appreciate and value. There are people who'll be like, okay, well, I would recommend, getting work by such and such artists, and and they'll go out and shop and buy it for you, and so you have an expert's eye, buying you your art. I don't know, but
have you ever watched the show? Yeah, have you ever seen the show Leverage?
No.
Oh well, it's a show about these sort of, there's a con artist, like a grifter, there's somebody who's a hacker, there's somebody who's and they go and they screw over big corporations that have screwed over like some little person, and they'll screw over the corporation and get the person's money back, right? But there's this amazing scene in one of the shows where she's like an incredible con artist, a grifter, and she's trying to teach the guy like how to do it, right? And so she has 2 bottles of wine that are both identical, and the guy comes up to the bar and she says, hey, would you like something? We have and then they get into a conversation, and then she gives him like a sip, and she goes, you know what? You seem like a really nice guy. Do you want to try our really good stuff? There's not a lot of people in here right now. And so she takes out a really nice cloth napkin, and she lays it out very, very, very carefully on the bar, and then she goes and into a case and she takes out special glasses, and she cleans it specially and polishes it and brings it over. And then she pulls out, she sets the scene perfectly, and she takes the bottle out and she opens it very carefully, and she just like smells the cork, and she takes a sip and she pours it, and the guy sips it and he goes, "Oh my God, that is amazing." And she goes, "That's exactly the same wine I just gave you." And he says, "No." And he goes, "But it actually did taste better." He goes, "I'm not," totally. Right? And so I'm saying, when you're trying to sell art, don't you sometimes have to kind of like give like a story, or when in fact you basically just made it because you were possessed by a demon and you thought it was beautiful, or you're not really sure why you produced this beautiful thing. Right, but they want a story to tell their friends about how, I got this antique on a little small place, and it was like it lived in somebody's asshole during World War II, and like whatever. Like it's a great watch. Your grandfather gave it to you. Whatever. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you?
I mean, well, you do have to have a story, but I mean, it's not. I don't know. I think you do have to have a story, but what that story is, it really depends on the artist and how they're making their work. And, I think there are definitely artists, I don't know, like Damien Hirst is like constantly like playing this kind of like got you, fuck you game, with his stuff. And, and it, I don't know. So like that's whatever. That's his thing, And Jeff Koons is the same thing. And then you have people who are like incredibly sincere and earnest, and incorporate their meditation practice and with their whatever. And that's cool too. And and if you're buying art, maybe you like the one type of story and not the other, or whatever. But so that like. It's I don't know. It's fucking fascinating. There's as many different ways of making art and making stories about the art as there are artists. Mm-hmm. And you can clump them. There's a so it's sort of like a sea. It's a body of water of artists and art, and you can kind of group them together. You can make groupings that make sense. But then you can break those apart and make other groupings that also make sense. And then collectors, it's like what people buy is really about them as much as it is about the art. And so, some collectors really, there are people who just really like dark, weird, fucked up shit.
Yeah.
And that's their thing. That's their Jimmy Jam. And other people like, shiny, bright colored things and with lots of plastic and steel. I don't know. So it's what's amazing to me, though. I mean, in your question about how do you sell it to rich people, what I kind of never can quite wrap my head around fully, but it fascinates me endlessly, is that with the thing about art and the art market and the art world now is it's like, in some sense, artists are just creating capital, because it's just gets bought and sold and it accrues value, and there's no, it's like the freest form of economy. Because the values are only determined by agreement, by what people are willing to pay for them. So it's like the ultimate non anchored currency. It's just bizarre. And it, I don't know. And some people are incredibly successful.
And it's been like that for hundreds of years. It's been an excellent way. Yeah. It's been an excellent way to sort of take value and put it inside, and then you can sort of cross borders with it. It's very easy. It's not. I mean, if you want to cross the border from, let's say, I don't know, from Russia, you want to come to New York, and you've got like, you're one of those oligarchs or something like that, and you want to like bring over $10 million, $20 million, that's very, very risky. Right? If you try and do that over the internet through wire, that can be traced. If you want to bring over currency, that can be seized. They can ask you a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But if you buy some paintings, roll them up in a thing, you don't even have to, you can declare them and just cross. Most borders don't really care very much about that. They don't pay much attention to it.
No, that's not true.
They've changed that?
They do. Yeah, they do. And actually, there's an interesting story. They didn't used to, and there's one, I think it was in this, now, the details of this story, you have to look this up, but there's one fucking border guard in Switzerland in like the Second World War or something. Somebody was coming across the border and they had paintings, and he said, those, there were no laws in place, there were no rules. This just guy was like, those are worth money. You have to pay a tax. Like I'm going to treat them like anything else that's worth money. You have to like pay a duty on it. And before that, it never been applied to art. Ever.
Wow.
And after that, it is everywhere. So when I take art across the border between Canada and the US, I have to go through the commercial like shipping lane. I have to have like, all this crazy paperwork that has to accompany the work going in and accompany it coming back out.
That's wild.
And it's a whole crazy thing. That's pretty universal.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. I guess I have to go, because it was the Russian journalist Masha Gessen in her book on Putin's Russia, and she mentions how, maybe I'm like misremembering how she put it, but she said that this was like a really important way in which people would sort of launder money across borders, because post 9/11 they've really clamped down on financial markets. It's much harder. Yeah. They have forensic accounting and they can sort of chase after things, and basically until we have like very, very well functioning encrypted cryptocurrencies, there's only a few ways to kind of get money across borders without there being a trace of it, right? And that's right. Apparently like art is one really good way to do that. But
totally. And there's these, so again, Switzerland, there's a few of these places around the world, but there's one really crazy one I was reading about in Switzerland. It's like a giant, crazy, climate controlled, ultra high security warehouse where you can park your art collection that, could easily, depending on who you are, could easily be worth, God, $500 million, whatever. And it's not just the climate, it's totally climate controlled. And like, this is what they do. This is all they do is take art and store it. It's like a rental locker for assets worth in excess of, hundreds of millions of dollars. But then on top of it, obviously, because of what's in this fucker, the security is bananagrams. Like just have, like Navy SEALs and stuff, like whatever, like protecting these people's shit. And this is it again, where it's just capital. Like, so it's art, but nobody's seeing it. Like it.
Yeah, it's
like the light of day isn't touching it.
Stored away. Yeah.
Stored away.
It's
yeah. And you said it's been, this, as you pointed out, it's true. This has been going on forever. But Eliza, my wife, and I were in Vienna a couple of years ago and went to the National Museum or whatever, which really was just a giant, the treasure box of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You go through and it's just, it's the emperor's lineage, their accumulation of shit. In this, and I don't know, it's amazing. And they every major country in Europe has the same, like whatever. England has the crown jewels, but I don't know.
Yeah, they would cure it. It's in Voltaire's Bastards. The Canadian philosopher John Ralston Saul has this whole section. I mean, I know it's been years since we read that, but like it's where he talks about the sort of the changing idea of the artist in society, and he says that it used to be for most of Western civilization, artists were considered completely a part of society. It was like being, I don't know, being a fisherman, being like the priest, being, the blacksmith, and artists, it was considered a skill, a really, really important skill. They would make beautiful things, work with different materials, but they were definitely not outside of society. And then he says, basically with the rise of kind of modern art and sort of modernism in the 20th century, there's sort of influence of Nietzsche and other people like that. Suddenly, the artist was recast as this like fucked up person who's sort of like a saint or ascetic, and they're outside of a sick society, and they're looking in. And they're sort of judging, and they're kind of half crazy, and they sort of have visions. And basically, for a secular 20th century, the artist became the equivalent of what used to be kind of the saint or the ascetic, right? And he says that this was this switch basically meant. Well, it meant a couple of things. First of all, he said all sorts of artists started acting like idiot, like I started acting crazy to sort of play the part, right? Like, I'm supposed to be an emotionally unstable drug addict who's like who's like suicidal all the time. So he said some people actually started, like Biggie Smalls, who was like not at all, a lot of those people in hip hop where they basically were themselves total good kids in school and never did anything, but then they get into hip hop, and so they start playing the part, and pretty soon they're playing the part so much that they actually are the part, and then they're dead, But so he says basically like all these artists started playing the part of the fucked up artist because that's what an artist is supposed to do. And he said also it means that they went and all sort of art history was reinterpreted according to this lens. And so artists like Michelangelo, who were kind of fucked up and were in trouble with the law a lot, and they suddenly were brought to prominence, and artists that were completely functional, normal members of society who had kids and did normal shit and didn't stab their wife in the face. Like those people, yeah, exactly. Those people were like
the non-Caravaggio.
Yeah, they were like suddenly downplayed, and so when they were telling the story of art, right? And so one of the many things I've always found fascinating about you is that you've always been into art since you were a little kid. I mean, to listeners, Bevan and I have known each other for basically our entire lives. But you've always been into art, but you've never really seemed to be in any way affected by sort of how an artist is supposed to dress or behave. How did you avoid that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is I think it goes back to, all of what you say is true about modernism and artists, the character of the artist. But I also think that in the 20th and 21st century, I mean, that's changed again. And there's just aren't any rules. You now have incredibly square people who are like blue chip artists, and it's fine. So I don't know. I guess I've never really felt pressure of any kind about how I should behave or dress or whatever.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask you this for years, by the way. How does a kid from a really religious Catholic household with a dad who's a world-renowned mathematician end up in fucking art?
Well, I think
you're the only one.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's actually first of all, I think that Catholicism is actually a massive asset to a person who's going to become an artist. I mean, you know, growing up with this, you know, believing in magic effectively.
And pretty things. I mean, Protestant churches are so boring,
oh
right?
God, yeah. No, and I mean, shit, with, you know, the bells and smells and the candles and the
stained glass and
stained glass and these horribly morbid saint characters with their, I mean, Jesus, it's all, you know, no, it's, I think Catholicism and even, and, you know, going through the 20th century, there's you know, there's so many artists who, like grew up Catholic, and then, you know, I don't know, I think you can kind of tell people who grew up Catholic by the kind of art they make. It tends to be really, really, like, I don't know, flowery and dark too, maybe.
Yeah. Well, but, I mean, yours is, some of your stuff is very colorful and flowery, but some of your stuff is incredibly Spartan and sort of Puritan and Protestant. You know, just clean white lines and very simple and classical.
Yeah, I think that's the mathematician part of
the
equation, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I'm the only one who does art specifically, but you know, my siblings are all do very creative work in their own fields. You know, they don't you know, make shit out of clay and whatever, but they, you know, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, were your parents happy when you sort of, did you ever like say to them one day, like sort of like coming out, like, Mom and Dad, I'm gay? Like, did you ever come out and say like, Mom and Dad, I'm an artist?
No, they knew from, I mean, I just drew incessantly from the moment I could hold a pencil. And
yeah.
I just like, it was just like nonstop. It was, I think, you know, we both know, you know, you have kids, you just, you know, there's shit in there.
See.
You just see it and you're like, well, whatever, I guess.
Yeah, I have all these like sort of
X on my hands. Like,
yeah, I remember I have all these like hilarious memories of you when you're a kid. But I remember one sort of iconic image that sort of burned in my mind is we were all, and this happened a couple of times, but there was one where it was really hilarious, and it was we were having like a snowball fight in the back of the co-op, this big like vicious snowball fight. And then you were on our side. We were like throwing snowballs against Sylvain and like a bunch of, and suddenly I looked over and you were like the shittiest soldier. You were like down on your stomach, drawing with like beautiful things in the snow with a stick.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you know, but play your position here. But you were just like, we're like, it was sort of like when Felicity, when she was little, and we would go and watch her soccer games when she was really little, and she would just stop playing and be down on the ground, like looking for flowers and clovers, like playing in the grass, like while everybody's running around, like, you know, in the middle of a soccer game. You would do that where we were, like, you would be down there doing like pretty things in the snow while we're having like a vicious snowball fight, and there's like whizzing over your head and you're not even like noticing. It was hilarious. So hilarious.
Yeah, I probably was a good candidate for like Adderall or something. I wasn't focusing the way I should on the task at hand.
Yeah. So you know, so many of my former students who've tried to make a go at sort of a life as an artist have failed miserably and ended up, you know, going back and doing like an accounting degree or something like that. And, you know, part of it, I think, is because it's just an incredibly, it's a difficult path. Not very many people are successful. And part of it is because, you know, some of them just were untalented and they weren't very good. Like, you look at their stuff and you're like, no, that's never going to happen. But then also some of them, I think it's because they have a sort of very precious idea of what being an artist is, which is exactly the kind of precious idea that John Ralston Saul is sort of poking fun at, this modernist idea. To what extent do you think the fact that not only have you been trained in fine art, but you came at it as also sort of from a cabinet making background, so do you think that affects the way you think about being an artist?
Well, the cabinet making background came after the, you know, that was a late addition. It was really, I went, if you remember, I went to art school.
You went through Dawson, yeah.
Yeah,
and then you went to Rosemount, right? Yeah.
But what I realized when I was at Dawson was, so because my parents had been so good about getting a strong classical training in drawing and painting, by the time I got to Dawson, I just, I'd forgotten more about what they were teaching than what was being taught. I was just like a complete, from a technical standpoint, it was just, I was kind of like, oh my God, what am I, it was like going back in time 4 years and like doing drawing exercises again. It was just insane. But I did get interested in sculpture, which I'd never even thought about before. I'd never even crossed my mind to make sculpture. And then this was a huge epiphany. And then the cabinet making thing I just realized, if I want to learn how to work with three-dimensional materials and make three-dimensional things, this is the worst place to learn that. This is bullshit.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about where I could acquire that skill set best. And in Montreal has that tradition, the European tradition basically of furniture making. I just thought that seemed like a good way to go, and it did exactly what I hoped it would. So now I am in the position with three-dimensional materials that I was with painting and drawing, which is that I can make anything.
Yeah. Well, I think that's I mean, there's so many things that are amazing about that, but probably just from the most basic thing is that most artists, I think, traditional artists, they think, I'm going to make something beautiful that you can hang on your wall, and that'll like sort of beautify a room. Whereas if with the skill set that you have, it's like, I can not only make something beautiful that you can put on your wall, I can make a beautiful wall. Like, I can make a beautiful room. I can design the whole shit, like everything. Like I'm not which is an incredible power, right? Like to be able to not just like I can not just make something beautiful that you can put in a space. I can make the whole space a work of art.
Yeah.
Right?
It's hard. It is tricky though. We get back to my original the thing I said before, which is that if you can make anything, then you're presented with this difficult problem of deciding what to make. Like, okay, and I don't know. It's not, and that's one thing that most artists don't have. I think most artists don't really have that problem. They have like a thing that they know how to do, and it's in their what they can make is limited by what they're able to make. I suppose that's changing now with people, with people working with fabricators. And now, if you're successful and people like your ideas and buy your art, you don't even make anything anymore. You just have it made for you, which is cool. But I think a big thing that in the post-Duchamp world, is that, like a big, when you're looking back at, European masters and whatever art prior to that, there's a lot of skill involved, and it was, the materials were expensive. There, you couldn't call anything art. There was a class of stuff that was clearly art, and there was a class, and then everything else. And now, and there was a certain value inherent in the stuff, right? The skills of the person making it took a long time to acquire. Usually the materials were rare or very labor intensive to produce, and so on and so forth. And so like there was a real scarcity in terms of the final product, and the value that was assigned to things was based on real things in some sense. Whereas now, I mean, fucking take a shit on a plate and say I want $1 million for it, and like who's like, if somebody's willing to give you $1 million, well, guess what? That shit on that plate is worth $1 million now.
Yeah, like, but you've never been tempted by that. I mean, like one of the things that I've always liked is you believe in beauty. you're not embarrassed to like say, yeah, I like pretty things, I like beauty, right?
Yeah.
That's which is
No.
I know like among the cool kids in some circles, that's like, oh, yeah, we're so past that, you know.
Although I feel like in some sense, like that was a coming out experience at some point. I had to, like, you know, vis-a-vis other artists and certainly, you know, in university and like doing an MFA, just like coming to terms with that and being like, you know what, I really like stuff to be really pretty and and nicely finished, and I'm not, you know, there's especially in this academic art world, there's this rampant anti-aestheticism that's like, whatever, you know, whatever. Not hating on it, but it's just not my thing. And
it's a really big thing. There was the philosopher Alexander Nehamas a couple of years published a book. It's absolutely amazing. It's called like a defense of the beautiful. In defense of the beautiful, and it's a whole like extended kind of philosophical sort of saying, like we've just at some point we decided in the early 20th century that only dark things are true, only all truths are ugly, and so therefore nothing beautiful is true. It's all just an illusion and all this stuff. But actually, that's one of the other questions I want to ask you. I mean, you've had a very fascinating kind of background. So on top of being able to work with practically any kind of materials and being able to not only design something beautiful that goes on a wall, but to say, you know, I can give you a room that's an installation, like you can a painting you walk into, you know, the whole room can be basically a work of art. But you also have this background in philosophy, right? You've got a philosophy degree. How do you think that sort of philosophy background informs your art, or like how you sort of think about your art, and how does that affect it?
It's an interesting question. I'm not even sure. You know, it's funny. I did, you know, the philosophy degree is an undergrad degree, did philosophy and history, if you may recall, and then going into my MFA then a few years later, I imagined that this was going to be a really great combo, and it was going to serve me well. And I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. I guess the answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't ever really been able to put my finger on that one, and I've thought about it some. But
because I've seen stuff that you've written about your art, and I've seen you talking to people at shows and stuff like that, and you seem to be able to talk very, very theoretically and very sort of in a very interesting way about your art. And when I've seen you talking like that, or when I've read things that you've written about it, I always sort of think, you know, okay, is this him basically just getting into character and doing what you have to do to, like, you know, to hustle to like make this work?
Yeah.
Or is he actually, like, you know, able to sort of talk about this stuff at this level because of the sort of the philosophy background and the everything? And I can never really tell. I mean, either's fine, actually.
Yeah. No, I think, well, actually, you know, now the more I think about it now, I do have more to say on the subject, which is that actually, I think, if anything, my philosophy education, training, whatever you want to call it, has been more of a liability than anything, because I really tended towards, you know, Anglo-American analytic philosophy, you know, philosophy over the continental world in terms of my interest and what sort of felt right, or I don't know, rang true to me, or something. You know, whatever. Maybe it's
the whole mathematician dad, right? Yeah.
And so, and then moving into the art world, that whole philosophical tradition is basically just antithetical to the way people think and talk and write about art. And if I'd been really into continental philosophy and done, you know, gone gone down the Heidegger hole and fucking whatever, like I'd be in a much better position to talk about my work or work in ways that I think people in the art world want to hear work talked about. I actually, yeah, it's funny. I don't even think. I think this is kind of universally true. I find 9.5 times out of 10, when I hear artists talk about their work, I just wish they hadn't. I just like, and I swear to God, I'm not being humble. I put myself in that category as well. I
like listening to you talk about art. I know what you mean. When you hear most of them talk, it's like it's just a little bit better than listening to hockey players talk about hockey. It's like, we're gonna try and follow the puck, try and get it in the goal,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, well,
and they just
try to be a team. Try to be a team
player. Gonna try and stay close to the puck, and we're gonna pass it around and try and
get out there and give it my best. Really,
and it's just so they have this like pained expression on their face, like like they're, I don't know, girlfriend's asking them to talk about their feelings or something. They just like this bad.
Yeah, there's this artist that I don't know if you know, Tom Friedman. Do you know him?
I've heard of him.
Not the writer.
No, anyway, I know.
He just has. I absolutely adore his work. It's just incredible. So he has this one piece. It's a white piece of paper. It's called 1,000 Hours of Staring, and it's a piece of paper that he stared at for 1,000 hours, literally. And he has one. I don't know. The work's fucking insane. But and there's another piece where it's a plinth and there's nothing on it, and he had a witch cast a spell on the space above the plinth.
Oh God! Yeah. See, this guy sounds like a total con artist.
Well, no, and some of his stuff is incredibly labor intensive and like just you can barely believe it, like what he's done, and he makes all this stuff himself. I think he has assistants now that anyway, and I saw that he did a speech an artist talk lecture that was you could stream online, that he did at the School of Visual Arts in New York, I think, and I watched it, and oh my God. So his whole art practice stems from his practice of Zen Buddhism and meditation. Like which kind of it makes sense once you know that, but it was amazing. The pieces are just magical, and then when he talked about them, they just like all the air went out of them. It was like it's like, oh God. Anyway,
yeah, there's a wonderful scene, and I think it's
now when I see
Il
this stuff, I still
Postino.
love it, but I have to actively like bracket him out of the work.
Yeah, well, there's a wonderful line in the movie Il Postino where this guy who's basically a postman, right? And he asks Pablo Neruda, the poet, to explain one of his poems. And Pablo Neruda looks at him and laughs, and he goes, "Poetry explained is banal."
Yeah,
like
true.
If I wanted
absolutely.
to express this in like prose, that I would have. I can't express it in prose. That's why I wrote a poem. Like
right, exactly, yeah, that's how I feel about talking about my work. I can hear my or writing about it. I just I don't know. I hate it.
Yeah. Okay. Another question I wanted to ask you that has to do with the sort of the Protestant work ethic, which I find increasingly the Protestant work ethic has sort of had this insidious, especially in the United States, but in Canada as well, has sort of got into the art world and the way we think about art. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, two mutual friends of ours, I won't mention who they are, but they're really into art. And they went to go see like this retrospective of Jackson Pollock, right? Mm-hmm. And apparently of course, Jack the Ripper, right? So like his whole drip things.
Yeah.
And they big fans of Jackson Pollock. But in this retrospect, it showed him doing much more kind of figurative stuff, and he sucks. Like he can't he can't paint like a person with their eyes in the right place. And it's not like they're out of place on purpose, like Picasso. Like, he just can't fucking paint proportions properly. He can't paint a house properly. And so this caused, our mutual friend was for decades, lifelong fan of Pollock, to say, well, now I think basically he was doing that drip stuff because he just didn't know how to paint. And basically this was a big fraud. And I remember this thinking, okay, there's something really wrong with that. Like, if you like what he's doing, the abstract stuff, then shouldn't your appreciation of it be all that matters, right? And then I saw that this is kind of a pattern, right? Like, so in the same week that this happened, a couple of other things happened. I got a card from somebody who it was like hand painted. And she included in the card, she mentioned how many hours went into painting that.
Oh, for fuck's sake, yeah.
And I thought it was so unbelievably tacky. And then in the same fucking week, it was like the universe was sending me like a message or something like, hey, people suck. And then I got like this blanket, and it's a very nice gift. It's very nice. It was sort of knit blanket, and it was knit for us. And the person, again, included in the card, like, I don't know, this took me 184 hours to make, as if this is supposed to make it more beautiful. And so it seems to me like art should be fundamentally judged by whether or not it's beautiful, whether or not it elicits certain responses. But it seems like the Protestant work ethic has kind of seeped into. It's the kind of Martha Stewart thing, right? Like Martha Stewart, every time you see in her show, she wants you to know how you show up to the Thanksgiving dinner, she's sweaty, covered in flour, and it's like she desperately wants you to know how hard she slaved to make this meal, right? Which is the exact opposite of like the Renaissance ideal of like Baldassare Castiglione in the Book of the Courtier, where he says all true art is that which does not appear as art, right? And so you're supposed to hide all the work and have just the beautiful final product. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, again, there aren't any rules. I just, this piece, an acquaintance, an Instagram acquaintance posted a picture of a piece that I think was like an undergraduate piece, in a university, and I fucking love this piece. I wish I owned it. And it's a really, really shitty drawing, like really shitty, on a shitty piece of paper with just shit. And it just scratched over, like scribbled over again. It's letters, it's words, right? It's just text, but like he's gone over it a bunch of times. And what it says is, this drawing took me 10 hours to make. And it's super shitty.
But but I think there's like, if you take,
I love that. It's so elegant.
Yeah, it gets beautiful. But when you were telling me the thing about the sheet of paper, the Tom Friedman, where it's like 1,000 hours of staring or something like that, like that's part of the whole problem, right? It's this idea that what imbues things with value is how many labor hours were put into it, right? And I don't know if, I mean, obviously that might be interesting in some instances, but if you tell me that, okay, this bureau was handcrafted by like midgets in northern Vermont who only eat organic food that's made in Finland, and it took them 300 hours to do it, versus this other one that looks just as beautiful and somebody did it in, I don't know, 20 hours. Like, why is the one necessarily why am I supposed to like it more, and why is it supposed to be more beautiful because of the amount of hours that went into it, right?
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know, there's maybe something basic and human about it. You sort of, I think it does matter to a lot of people. It doesn't really matter to me. And I think, that's it. It can be really interesting if it's somehow really pertinent to the piece conceptually, like that 1,000 hours of staring. So that 1,000 hours of staring piece, he just incorporated into his meditation practice. He would just meditate for, which he does anyway, for, X number of hours a day. And he would sit in front of this piece of paper and just meditate on the piece of paper, staring at it. Yeah. And so it was like a byproduct of his meditation practice. So whatever. I like that piece. The other, some people might think it's stupid. It doesn't matter. But the other thing that I find it really interesting, and I feel like it's often where it bugs me is when it's like a crutch, or it's supposed to prop up work that doesn't stand on its own. Like the work's not that good. If it took you 200 hours to do it, I don't care. It's still not that good. Like, who gives a shit? And then another strategy I think that's related that people often do. And you see, like, I don't know, just having done MFA and like teaching undergraduate students, and it's not just undergraduate students, it's artists in general. Like another really popular strategy to prop up work that's not that good is to make lots of it. Like, there's 1,000 of these little like figurines. Yeah. Okay, they're all shit. Like, or whatever, like it's that, like, that's another thing. It's like, well, maybe if I make a lot of them, it'll carry some weight somehow. It's like, well, maybe. Yeah.
Give
it a try.
It's a book I read in grad school. I can't remember the name of the author, but it was called Even Better Than a Real Thing. And it was basically, this guy's argument was that part of the reason why art took the turn that it did in the 20th century was because of industrialization and mass production. So suddenly, it used to be rich people were the only ones that could afford like nice shit, but suddenly you could mass produce nice shit, lots of it. And so to distinguish themselves, what they would get is stuff that was handcrafted and that was like, one of a kind. And so this was a new way to like distinguish yourself, is you would get stuff that was handmade. Right.
And then they founded Brooklyn. and basically art has had to follow that. So you used to be like, for a long time in painting, the more realistic you could get, the better. But then suddenly you had photography, and it was like, oh shit, like a photograph can do this. So suddenly, we got to do something that photographers can't do. Let's go abstract, right? So now they do all this abstract stuff to differentiate themselves from, because they felt like photographers were moving on their territory, right? Like, so, and only abstract painting was taken seriously.
Exactly, right? But there's an amazing novel by Neil. I think it's his best novel ever, by Neil Stevenson. It's this futuristic, crazy novel. It's called The Diamond Age, and it's set in this future where they have these things called matter compilers, which are basically like a 3D printer on crack. Like it's these matter compilers, and they suck up all of this seawater, and they just suck up enough seawater and sediment from the bottom until they break it all down into down to like the atomic level, until they have like enough atoms of everything, and then basically they can make absolutely anything. So if you want to make like a diamond the size of a soccer ball, boom, you just like press diamond size of soccer. If you want to make food, you can make food. You can make like absolutely anything. And so it drastically changes. There's no food shortages ever again. You can suddenly build buildings that are like 500 floors high with these special materials. It's really, really trippy. But what's really crazy is that he's in this future world, the ultra rich, who are called the Neo-Victorians, or the Vickies for short. Guess what? They want all of their stuff handmade, organic, in the old way. And so there's this cottage industry of people who just make stuff for the ultra rich, which is not from a matter compiler. And it's like completely right. So I mean,
but it's so funny, because that's all, like, that's a real thing now, because you can fabricate diamonds, you can fabricate any kind of gem you want, right?
Yeah.
But those are worth less than the ones that come out of the ground and that occurred naturally. They just are. Like, they're worth a lot less. And, you know, a diamond that's been made from an incinerated ham sandwich is fucking identical to a flawless diamond that comes out of the ground at an atomic structural level. It's fucking identical. Like, what does it matter? But it does.
So what? You know, my son Indy wants to be an artist. He practices. Like, it's exactly like it's like you all over again. Like, he spends hours. Like, he's on summer vacation right now. He's not like out like playing with his friends most of the time. He hangs out with them sometimes, but he's on a strict schedule where he practices, and he has different kinds of things that he wants to work on, and different techniques, different mediums. He just watercolors, then this, then that. He practices hours and hours and hours every single day, right? So he wants to like actually make a career of this. What advice would you give to him, and to anybody who are our listeners who actually want to kind of make a career in art in the 21st century, when most artists, like writers, have been reduced to content producers, you know, that horrible term. How do you survive in this environment?
Well, to be honest, I don't make a living from my art. I haven't managed to even have it be self-sustaining. So I'm not the best person. I mean, what I would say, and like, you know, and, you know, it's like the kids students are talking about, like, try to make it art and then fail and move on to something else. I mean, this may sound, I'm sure it will, and I'm ashamed of myself for saying it in advance, but you have a career in art because you don't have any other choice. You're an artist because you can't not be. Like, I think, and I really think that's true. I really do.
But you clearly are drawing you're drawing a sort of a division between the kind of interior decorating stuff and the renovation stuff and the design stuff you do, and, you know, soft tissue and Jersey Girls and things like that. Like, you're drawing, because I kind of seen those things as one and the same.
Yeah, I mean, so my design work is, no, for sure. So in one sense, you know, you just work, you do exactly what he's doing. You work like hell on your skill set, and then trust that you'll be able to, people will pay you money to use that skill set to do something. Because it's a good, you know, because not everybody has that skill set, and that's true. Like, that's totally true. But in terms of if you're, I mean, for me, there's like my art, and then there's other stuff that I do with the same skill set that it doesn't. To me, it's not the same thing. It just isn't. And if I need to be able to be in my studio and making the bullshit that I make in order to like survive, like in order to remain sane and be able to just deal with the world and not, shoot myself. I need to be able to get into my studio and work through things, you know, that I'm thinking about, and work with materials. And it just sets my mind right. And I've had this experience before where I've gotten, and actually pretty recently, where for one reason or another, I've just gone through a period where I'm not able to get into the studio very much. And it's a bad scene. Like, I just don't do well. Yeah. So, you know,
I've heard this, I've heard this often from people.
For me, I just have to not worry about making money from the art so that I can keep doing it, which in turn keeps me healthy. And, you know, I really hope I'm not, you know, I think you have to be strategic, and and, you know, like gallery representation, and I'm doing the things that I need to do to hopefully get to a place at some point where my career is in a position where I actually am making money from, you know, that's where my principal source of income is. And I hope I get there, but if I don't, it's not going to stop me from doing it. You know, I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
because I have to.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's funny. The philosopher Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who just interviewed him the other day, actually, on the podcast. But he, in his book Anti-Fragile, he says he advocates what he calls barbell strategies, and he applies this to many, many different domains, everything from investing to being an artist. So, like you say, if you're investing, what you never want to do is have like all your money on kind of like blue chip stocks that what everybody says are the best stocks to buy at the moment. Instead, what we want to have is you want to have like most of your money in something that is like ridiculously safe, like super, super safe, like, treasury bonds or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you want to have like a small percentage of your money on total long shots. Like really long shots where you're likely to like lose the money and never make anything. But every once in a while, one of those long shots is gonna make you like, millions and millions of dollars. One of those long shots can pay off at some point, right? So, and he says also within your life strategy, if you want to be like a musician or a writer or an artist or any of these things or like professional, like in sports, you want to be in something that's a real long shot where the vast majority of people who try and do this fail, right? He says, if you're going to do that, what you should do is have a barbell strategy. So have like something else that is like really like, become like an accountant, or like have something else that can pay the bills, that is like your steady thing, and then do your like your art on the side, or your writing on the side, or your music on the side. Never try and like never put all your eggs in one basket when that's a very unlikely bet, right? So you have this like balanced strategy, and that way you get to do what you want, and you have and he gives like all these examples, and he says, a lot of the people who've done the best work in all kinds of art and music, poetry. Einstein did his best work when he was a customs clerk.
Yeah.
It wasn't when he was an academic. It was when he was a customs clerk. He had like a boring job, and then he would do this other stuff like on the side, and that was like amazing for him, right? Like and in the 19th century, most of the really great science and art was done by people who were something else. Like a lot of them were actually country parsons, in England and stuff like that. They basically they did science on their spare time when they weren't like giving sermons and burying people. Like, so I think actually your strategy is much more common in history than you might think.
Yeah, no, I think it is, and that's the trick. The trick, though, and I mean, having done an MFA and just being an artist and having a lot of artist friends, and the perennial problem is how do you make enough money to support yourself and your lifestyle or whatever, but have that work or whatever not leave you so depleted that you can't actually have a studio practice. It's taken me a long time to get to find that balance and to find my sort of niche. And I'd say I'm there now. But of the artists that I know indirectly, friends of friends, whatever, people who you also have to really, if you want to be serious and have a career, you have to treat it like a real career. Like you don't become a doctor in your spare time. If you want to be a doctor, you fucking go to school and take out loans and like do like whatever you do it. I think that's generally true too with art. I mean, I don't know. I think I probably could. I could be further along. I think I'd be a lot further along in my career if I didn't enjoy a really luxurious standard of living, and and if I like, had I foregone having a child, there would have been another 5 years of concerted work that
been more like
anyway, like whatever. So I don't know. Everybody's got to find their balance.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of it is like, how much of it is it the kind of the self-promotion and the kind of going, how much of it is the life of an artist sort of doing the art, and how much of it is like selling it, right? Because like I watched the Steve Jobs movie last night. It's been out for a while, but I finally watched it. And one of the things that's amazing watching that is you can totally see that part of the genius of Steve Jobs is, I mean, because he didn't, didn't really know how to write code. He didn't know how to like make certain. He didn't really know much about like computers and any of that stuff. What he was a phenomenal salesperson and marketing person. And I think really what comes through in the movie is that a main reason why he was so good at marketing is that he looked the part. He looked and he looked like the crazy, high-functioning, autistic male, asshole, genius computer guy. Like, he looked exactly like the part. And so he would get up and he would say these things. And he clearly is a very difficult person to deal with. And, but I think all of that persona, I'm not saying he put it on. I think it was like genuine, but I think that's part of
just lucky that's what
it was very key to why people were willing to entrust him with billions of dollars and stuff like that. So I just, going back to one of my original points, is I just wonder, do you have to kind of, do you have to get into character to be to sell your art? Do you have to like look like like an artist? Do you have to I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm incapable of doing that or sort of answer. Sort of, it wasn't like fully a question, but you said, you said earlier, you've seen me, at openings, wherever, talking about my art. I'm not much of an actor. I'm not able to go into character. Maybe if I was, I'd be better off professionally than I am. I can only do me, sadly. Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, there's this book called 7 Days in the Art World. Did you read that or hear about it? Anyway, it's not that new a book anymore, but anyway, it was pretty cool. This woman wrote this book about the art world, and each chapter is she goes deep on one thing. So like there's a chapter about art school, where she like goes and she sat in at Cal Arts, which is, one of these incredibly famous art schools that just, if you go there in theory, you've got it made, you're going to be a success. But anyway, and just goes deep on art school and like what the fuck is going on there, and like what are these people doing, and then another one where she's in the auction circuit and like looking at that whole thing. And anyway, but she has these recurring characters that that keep popping up of Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons as being these sort of like, weird standout, whatever, what they are. Like, it's cool. And she runs into them at art fairs, and she interviewed them both. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, at the very end of the book, there's this incredible scene that she describes where they were at the Venice Biennale, and she witnessed Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst coming into contact with one another. And what she describes is this incredibly like tense, fucked up game of like psychological chicken. Between the two of them.
This sounds like WWF art version.
It really is. It was amazing. I was just like, holy fuck, yeah, because if you are one of those guys where your entire net worth and, I don't know, like identity and everything is tied up in like this is what
persona.
People believe
now you're making it sound like a walk-off in Zoolander.
Literally, it's exactly what she was describing, except with some asshole artist.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I was like, oh God, yeah, I can't even, yeah.
What's that movie? I'm totally blanking on the name.
And I would just in that, if I was one of those guys, I would be so completely disarmed in that situation. I just be like, "Hi, nice to see you."
It's like, no, what's that movie? It's like something like In Through the Pantry Door. It's about street art, and it's like, it's this guy.
Oh no, exit through the gift shop.
Exit, yes. Oh my God,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
That movie is just savage. Where this guy basically, he's like a retro clothing store guy in LA from France.
Mr. Brainwash.
And he just like decides to like create a persona for himself, and he ends up selling millions and millions of dollars of art. You remember that? He's like having other people do it all for him, and it's all just like a giant scam.
Well, the thing is with that, I mean, I don't know, my takeaway from that, of that guy was he was sincere. He just didn't see any difference between, he didn't like have any actual ideas or driving sort of, you just like, this is what street art looks like. We can make tons of this shit. And it's just like, I thought that was like Banksy's thing with him is like, he's kind of this fascinating guy. Like he's kind of bullshit, but he's not bullshitting because he genuinely doesn't see the difference between what he's doing and what street art, like other, like air quotes, legitimate street artists are doing. As far as he's concerned, there's not any difference. It's the same. Like, he's like, what are you talking about? I'm making the same stuff.
Yeah.
There's lots of it, like whatever. And it is so funny with that, funny story with that movie. When Lali and I first, moved to New York, when we came back from India, we were walking through Soho, and it was an art gallery, and I walked in, and I was just looking around at the stuff, and it was like what the fuck is this? it's like fucking like Andy Warhol jizzing on fucking. What the fuck? I just what the fuck? Anyway, and we both were like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, I can't wrap my head around that. He's getting out of here.
Yeah, there's that great line at the end of that movie where Banksy says, I used to say that everybody should do art. I don't say that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Anyway, so we left just befuddled by what we'd seen, and just kind of like tried to forget about it as soon as possible. And then, yeah, it was like a year or two later, we saw that movie, and we were like, holy shit, that's that guy. We saw his stuff.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't see the movie. Yeah.
The gallery people in that gallery, some gallery, like whatever, it was like a cheesy gallery. Like the whole thing was fucking cheesy. And then people were coming over and telling us about him, and about how he's this new artist, and like doing the sales pitch on like why like how this stuff was good and how many hours it took to make, or whatever, like whatever. And we were just like, okay, guy.
Yeah,
sure, whatever you say, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I think it's. I saw that movie not as, if I gave you that impression, I was mistaken. I didn't see that movie as an indictment of him. I saw that movie as an indictment of people who sort of the art consumer, like the art market. Like, I didn't think it was saying that he was fraudulent. I think it was saying that it just showed how completely artificial and wacky the art market is, like how people decide. You know what it reminded me of? It's there's a friend of mine who grew up, you'll know who I'm talking about, who grew up in Gary, Indiana. And she told me this like hilarious story. She said that there was this fancy French restaurant in her town, and it was like And the guy was like this incredibly temperamental chef, and he would yell at people, and he would yell at customers, and he would, but this was like part of his charm, it was part of his shtick. Like people were like, oh my God, he's like a temperamental French chef and everything. Like, so, and it was like the fancy place to go to in this like shitty working class town. I mean, Gary's like sort of Verdun on its worst day, but it's a suburb of Chicago, which is in Indiana, right? Right on the border. So anyway, she was like a brilliant student, and she went off to university, and then she got a Fulbright scholarship, and she went to study in France for a year in Strasbourg. And so while she was over there, her French became, fantastic. So she came back after her year abroad. And her parents, they wanted to take her to somewhere nice. And so they're like, well, we'll take you to the French place. You just came back from France. So they take her there, and she immediately tries to sort of engage the French chef in conversation in French. And he gets really awkward, and he's kind of walking away and moving away, and suddenly is looking at the menu, and things are kind of wrong. She realized she found out the guy's not even French.
Oh.
He was not even French. He was completely just basically like somebody putting on a fake. He's putting on a fake French accent.
Miserable French person.
And putting on. But the thing is this goes back to my original question to you, right? Like, if you don't speak French, how do you know if somebody speaks French, right? If you're colorblind, how do you know if somebody's telling you the truth about the color of that sweater? How do you know if somebody doesn't really know, good art from shit art? If they don't know, if they can't tell the difference between a real and a fake, then how do you, how do you, and that's a basic kind of problem that we deal with all the time, because we live in an increasingly specialized world where there's all these like I can't understand how nuclear power plants work. There's so many things that I can't, and so I have to rely on experts in the field. But how do you decide who's a real artist, who's a real French chef, who's a real climate expert, climatologist, when you yourself don't have the requisite skills?
Or knowledge base to make that decision. Yeah. I don't know.
And I think it's a massive problem in something like art, because I think when it comes to art, I think most people especially the art market, I think most people are like those customers in the French restaurant in Gary, Indiana. They're in there and they don't speak French, but they love the fact that they're in a fancy restaurant, and and so basically the guy, in order to sell the food at the inflated price, has to play the part, right? Yeah. So, and if you had, let's say, a real French chef moved into that town who was actually French and actually a French chef, but could speak English perfectly without an accent, he might have to actually start speaking with an accent in order to sell his food.
He might. Yeah.
And if he was a normal person who's like a Buddhist and meditates an hour a day and is very chill and, stoic, he might have to start acting like a temperamental asshole in order to sell the food.
Yeah.
Do you understand? I wonder if artists have to do that to some extent.
Some I don't even know. I mean, not the artists I know don't. I don't. But I think what you're talking about there, though, does sound like, to some degree, talking about somebody being disingenuous, right?
Catch me if you can, right?
Exactly. But I don't even think, and no doubt there are artists who are doing that, who are putting on an act and whatever, and don't really interested in those people. But you don't even have to go there for it to get murky and confusing and weird as to what's good art and bad. It's so going back to philosophy and aesthetics. What's the difference between good art and bad art? And if you have a definition, if you can come up with a working definition of where you can classify good art and bad art, then don't you also have in hand a definition for art and not art?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that the same thing?
Yeah.
You know, and then like you're making me as you were talking, I was thinking. Went to the this past year to the Outsider Art Fair in New York, and it's a frigging bizarre, weird thing. So it's this is art fair. It's pretty big, and it's all these galleries that specialize in outsider art. Now, for the listeners who don't know what that is, in rough justice, loose terms, it's art that isn't part of the sort of established contemporary art world. So, like in the 50s, it was anybody making work that was figurative outside of New York City was an outsider artist. Like, and then and now, so and how you define that is very, very, especially now when anything can be art or whatever. So I went to this art fair, and there was like a lot of art that was done by, there were a lot of people had stuff that was by like indigenous artists, that is like outsider art to the art world, but it's not, it's made in a completely different context. It's not, it's not outsider art to the context it was made in. And then, so like a textbook outsider artist would be like the whack job who, he dies and somebody goes into his house and it turns out he's created an entire like immersive environment out of tinfoil in his spare time and never showed it to anybody.
Wow.
And it's fucking crazy and amazing. And there actually was a guy like that.
You were just making that up, Eddie?
No, that's a real thing. But then, a lot of people like to have work to show and sell at the Outsider Art Fair will bring work that it's problematic if you want to call it outsider art, because
it's so funny when you say outsider art. I gotta tell you, like, I can't stop thinking, when you say outsider art, I can't stop thinking about the worst piece of art. But it was so bad, it was almost like beautiful. It was like the worst piece of art I've ever seen in my life. Eva B on Saint Laurent?
Yeah.
The secondhand clothing store. For years, they had in the window, there was like a sign that said outsider art. And underneath it, like, it was in the window for years. It's in the window for so long that it got like aged by the sun and everything.
Yeah, it was like bleached and dusty.
But okay, listen to this. You may remember it. It was like unbelievable. So what it was these three women, they basically were all like, I guess they were roommates or something, and their menstrual cycles got like coordinated, and so they all pulled out used tampons like on the same day, and they nailed them to this, like, they got them to attach them to this canvas, like these bloody like used tampons, and then they cut like their pubic hair. And like one of them was clearly, was redhead, firebox. And like one of them was blonde and one of them had like black pubic hair. And they stuck with some kind of glue a bunch of like pubic hair on this canvas with these three bloody tampons. And this was art. And it was up in the window in Eva B. For under this sign that said outsider art. And so as soon as you said outsider art, I thought, oh my God, that like,
yeah.
And it was there for years, and then suddenly it was like taken away, and
somebody bought it.
Yeah. I actually, like, it was dusty and messed up, and I actually kind of like, I don't know, missed it in a weird, horrible way. But like, so I went and asked Geneva B. I said, like, do you remember that thing you had in the window for a long time? It was and I described it, and they started laughing, and they're like, yeah, I don't know if we threw it out or it's somewhere else. I don't know. I think somebody probably threw it out. Like, but yeah, it was apparently this sort of epic. They had it there for years.
Oh,
all right, and like that, so that's outsider art. But that's a sort of perfect. It brings me to my last question to you, which is, you could plead the fifth on this if you want to, but a lot of artists that I've talked to, especially in the last like 5 years, artists, poets, filmmakers, stuff like that, have talked about how in order to kind of get new ideas, new kind of create, because the natural, I guess it's very natural for our mind to sort of get into a rut, and you sort of think the same sort of things, and you get into a routine that a lot of them use, like whether like weed or use like various kinds, or traveling, or use like psychedelics or something like that to sort of come up with new ideas, right? So what is your method, and do you use any of this stuff?
I use all the drugs as much as possible because I love them. I do not actually use them to come up with ideas. So I don't know.
Just because it feels good, mommy.
No, I think it's funny. I'm just getting started on it. Michael Pollan's new book.
Oh God, I want to. Changing your mind. Oh my
God.
God.
How to change your mind.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. But
yeah, this is like the thing I think I'm most excited about right now. Is I think there is every reason to believe that hallucinogens are going to be the next week. Like it's all going to be okay again, and they're going to be back. I think there's there's so much research being done with them now. The results are mind blowing as they were when the research was being done back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, and now, and it's like, I think, I don't know, I was talking about it with my brother. I bet you, some state is gonna decriminalize magic mushrooms, and then it's just gonna be a ripple effect, and they're all gonna, all the coastal blue states are gonna go that way. That's terrific. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't get high to make art. Sometimes I get high and make art, but it's not. Yeah,
because I know for me, like for writing and like creative projects and things like that, if I get some of the most interesting ideas I've had is if I'm like tripping, I'll have like 10 ideas, which I wouldn't normally have. Like just in my regular life, I get a certain amount of ideas in different contexts, and they come to me, but I'll get like 10 ideas that I wouldn't normally have, let's say. And then the next day when I'm sort of thinking about those 10 ideas, usually on average, 8 or 9 of them are complete bullshit. Like just like complete, like you think about it when you're, completely sober, and you're like, that was really dumb. Like the reason I don't normally think about that is because that's a stupid idea. But there will be like 1 or 2 that are like really good ideas, but they're ideas that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because it just sort of it allows you to sort of think about something in a completely different way, like that you wouldn't normally see it as. It's sort of like when you're traveling. I think travel is very similar to this. Like when you're traveling, because you're in a totally new environment, you sort of see things that you wouldn't normally see, and you see things about yourself that you wouldn't normally see if you were in your environment.
Because the normal like default filters aren't in place because they don't work, because you're in an environment that they don't apply to anymore. Yeah. And no, for sure. It's as I said at the very beginning of our conversation, that I've over this past year moved into a different mode of artistic practice, and it's interesting. I used to, with my project-based practice, and I don't know, God knows, maybe I'll go back to that again at some point. I don't know. I don't really see it happening, but I would like, it was sort of like have an idea and then turn it into a project, and it was sort of like, there was like a logical, theoretical, conceptual construction being erected along with a material instantiation of it, and it would, just like build, and then, and then get to a point where it's like, okay, this is it. This is like the done version of what I was trying to do, and then move on to something else. But now is really exciting, and I don't see myself ever going back to the old version, is I just get into the studio and I just let it flow and just make stuff. And I don't necessarily know why I'm making or what it's about or I don't have a specific idea in mind that I'm trying to chase down. So now I'm making a lot of completely different things.
Wow.
Part of part of the same sort of internal conversation.
I can't do that at all.
But then what I can do is start editing down, and some things I'll say, I'm gonna, that didn't work. Yeah, it wasn't very successful. I don't really like that thing. It was very interesting. But then I'll have other things that I'll, sort of put together and say, oh, look at that. That's now creating a really interesting relationship and sort of suggesting a whole other, avenue of thought and consideration. Anyway, it's a really, it's awfully exciting.
Yeah, that's really
an exciting way to work.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, not many, it's all like very new, so nobody's really seen, except for people who've come for studio visits. Not many people have seen the product of this. I hope, I don't know, I hope it. I think it's good. I think the stuff's good. I think people are going to like it.
Wow.
I certainly do.
Can you just sort of, as we sort of closing up? Well, first of all, I want to say I'm starting that book today. Change your mind, and so I definitely would. John, I would like to get you. I would like to get you back on the podcast when we're both done with that book to talk about it.
Yes,
because that's amazing.
Yes.
But before I forget, can you sort of tell our listeners if they want to sort of your website, upcoming shows? Can you sort of tell them that information so they can go and?
Yeah. So I have work up right now at the Niagara Artists Centre, which is in St. Catharines, Ontario, and that's up through the beginning of August. So if anybody's in the Toronto area or going out to Niagara,
a lot of our listeners are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can go see I have a show there, and it's a great place too. The Niagara Artists Centre. It's a really cool institution and cool people. Really putting a lot of work in there it's a good project. It's a cool place. Anyway, and then my website is just my name.com. It's www.bevanramsay.com, BEVANRAMSAY.com. And that's my website. And then I'm represented by Armure in Montreal. Anybody in Montreal, if you don't know that gallery, you should go. It's incredible. And anybody who wants to visit should go check it out. Anyway, and on their website, they also have all the work that I've shown with them, along with texts by various people who've written about it. So yeah, those are.
And do you have any showing any stuff where you live in the States right now, or?
No, not currently. Right now, I'm really focused on production.
Yeah.
This new stuff. And so I'm aiming to have in the next month or so enough finished work to document and then start shopping that around for shows.
Awesome.
Places.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Fantastic.
yeah. So right. Yeah. I don't know. Sort of. That's been my MO. I sort of go through periods where I'm doing mostly sort of admin stuff and applying for things, and then other periods where I'm just mostly making work and kind of compartmentalize it like that. Hey, and John, before we go, one crazy thing that I don't know if you've seen it. This it's called The Century of the Self.
No.
Everybody has to see this. Just crazy. I have an Irish friend. We see each other once a year, and we always have great conversations, and we always sort of throw at each other the thing that's most blown our minds in the past year or whatever, since we saw each other last. And this time it was that. It's a 4-part BBC documentary series about how psychoanalysis is used in the 20th century by corporations and governments to completely reshape the way we are and do stuff. It's like
Cambridge Analytica type thing, like.
It really. I mean, so it starts all the way. I'll give you the elevator pitch that my friend gave. I mean, not that he needed to, because I was going to watch it because he told me about it. But this guy, Edward Bernays, that like nobody's ever heard of.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him for sure.
Yeah,
the PR guy who got the United States into World War I.
Well, no, he was at a high position in the Viennese government and in the Austrian government during World War I, where he was able to see firsthand the effective use of propaganda in motivating large populations to do things and believe things. And his takeaway was like, wait a minute, if this works in wartime, why wouldn't this work in peacetime for other purposes? And so, yeah, he moved to New York City and opened the first ever public relations office.
Yeah.
And anyway, it goes on from there, but you have to watch it.
We interviewed this guy recently named Jaffer Ali, who's like a marketing guru. He's unbelievable. Like, do you remember when we were teenagers? You remember that Faces of Death series?
Yeah.
He's the one who made that shit.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he made it. And he made like $25 million off of it. But anyway, he's done all these like crazy things.
And you interviewed him?
Yeah. He's a friend. He's a friend. But anyway, he was explaining in the podcast episode, it was unbelievable. He said basically like the way he did it was because he got like the rights to the first Faces of Death, which had sold like nothing. It sold like 1,000 copies, right? And so he basically ran this thing where like he would complain to journalists like, this is disgusting, this is horrible, it should be taken out of like stores right now, it's obscene. and suddenly this huge, it became a big thing. Like he was doing like 10 interviews a day from news organizations from like the Christian right and all these, asking like, oh my God, what are we should ban this. And he put on like the cover, Faces of Death, banned in 35 countries, right? It was total bullshit. It wasn't banned anywhere, but like they had never heard of it. And so when they would ask like, but they had no idea that he actually was the person who owned it was his company that was
drumming up PR for
and
it.
Like, and they did not, they spent $0 on marketing and made $25 million, and it became a sensation. They did Faces of Death 2, 3, 4, 5. And it was all basically, and so he is one of the people who, I have like a few friends who predicted very early on that Trump was going to win. And he was one of them. And he said, oh my God, this guy's dangerous. He's going to win. And he said, he's going to win because I've been in marketing my whole life. He's using techniques that I've used. Like he's doing exactly that. He's like trolling the media, trolling like, people and getting them to do all of his publicity for him. Like this guy's like he's a marketing genius, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. He's definitely
so that. Wow. So the Century of the Self is, I should check that out. I will totally.
Yeah, it goes on from there. I mean, that's sort of where it starts, and the advent of marketing and everything. But it goes. I mean, you'd find it fascinating too, because I think it's the third episode, the third of the fourth, goes into like the 70s and sort of like the movement for self-actualization and
like est and all that stuff. Like
it's really I don't know, for me it was really informative, because just to see, even by the time we came on the scene, by the time we were born, how radically different the world was from a very short time before. And it's just like a major phase, not just a phase change, but a phase change that's constantly changing and just keeps going. And I don't know, it puts what's happening now with Trump and other things, the Doug Fords and whatnot, into a much bigger, longer perspective. And where it really starts to just make sense in a horribly sensible way. It's really nuts.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. Anyway, and so I definitely want to get you on the podcast again to talk about changing your mind, because my God, that'll be fascinating. But
yeah.
Anyway, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And
my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been really fun.
Yeah, so I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.